No. Will it be easier for me to address you as Dr. Dan or Daniel?
Whatever.
Dr. Daniel.
Dan is enough.
Dr. Dan Schueftan?
Schueftan, yeah.
Schueftan. Okay. So just.
Okay.
Can I mention this?
What?
You serve as the advisor to Israel's National Security Council.
Yeah, but not the fellow. This is an ancient thing. The fellow of the
Okay.
Shalem Center
Okay.
in Jerusalem. The important thing is that I'm the director. Why don't I show you this on a card,
Yes.
and then you can have the in a moment.
No problem.
Find it.
Schueftan.
Schueftan. Yes.
Schueftan. Okay.
Yeah. I'm the director of the University of
So,
Haifa
Haifa.
National Security Studies Center.
No problem. Are you ready, Dr. Dan?
Yes.
Hi, welcome to the National Quiz Choice online news set with Hyatt. Right, and welcome to the show. And I have today Dr. Dan Schueftan, who is the director for University of Haifa at the National Security Studies Center in Israel. And he's here to visit Singapore, to enjoy how life is in Singapore, and as well as he's giving some lectures at the local university. Dr. Dan, thank you for joining us. We came to understand that you have served as the advisor to Israel's National Security Council and to two former prime ministers in Israel, for Yitzhak Rabin and Ariel Sharon. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah, among others. I've been consulted by Israeli decision makers for about 40 years from different sides of the political spectrum, but also defense ministers, chiefs of the intelligence community and the army and so on. So it's a very wide range.
And speaking about the whole range of issues that you've dealt with for many years right now, business travelers and fans from the Hyatt hotels, and as well as my readers on the National Critics' Choice, many of them are asking, is Israel confident to its present administration in coping reforms and the transitions that's happening in the Middle East? Will Israel see the possibility inside a peace treaty anytime soon?
I don't think that's a realistic proposition. First of all, let us speak about the confidence in the leadership. We have a very lively political scene, and of course there are those who support the government and those who very strongly oppose the government. But we have today a very wide coalition of 94 members out of 120 members of parliament, so it has very wide parliamentary support. Israelis are always critical of their leaders. This is the way Israeli politics is run. But basically, do Israelis have confidence in their government to deal with the national security challenges of Israel? I think the answer is yes. Concerning peace, I don't think there is a realistic chance of it in the foreseeable future. We hope that the peace with Egypt will not be broken. We hope that the Jordanian regime will not fall and continue the peace treaty that we have with Jordan. But I don't think new peace treaties are in the making at the moment, because what you have is a turmoil in the Arab world and a situation where realities in the Arab world itself are very uncertain. You have a lot of places there where you have a very, very high level of violence at the moment, on the verge of a civil war, sometimes a real civil war, threats to the regimes. So it's very difficult to predict what will happen or to assume that anything that you achieve today will also last later. So I don't see on the immediate horizon any realistic proposition, any realistic hope of a new peace agreement.
How important is the relationship between Egypt and Israel? today?
It is very important, but we don't know to what extent it will continue, even on the present level that is not satisfactory, and we are afraid that it will deteriorate. Let us start with the fact that Egypt is the most important Arab country. And until recently, Egypt was the anchor of the more responsible regimes against the radical elements in the Middle East, particularly Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and so on. Egypt was the anchor. Egypt was the regional leader. Egypt could bring together the Saudis, the Jordanians, and even the Israelis and the Americans into one policy of seeking to maintain stability in the region. The Egyptians are now in a completely different situation for two reasons. First of all, they are so busy with themselves that I don't see them playing a very major role in the area in the near future. And second, the people who came to power in Egypt, namely the Muslim Brothers and the army, are people who have very radical attitudes vis-a-vis the Middle East in general, Israel in particular. I'm speaking about the Muslim Brothers. They have always been enemies of Israel of the worst possible kind. I don't see it changing very dramatically in the near future. So it is possible that the Egyptians will now not go to war now because they depend on the United States, and I don't see them taking such a step, at least in the immediate future, but the direction is not a good one, and we are about to go through a very, very bumpy road.
Now, about the Arab Spring, what is the perception of the Arab Spring to Israel? And is the Arab Spring important to Israel?
It's very important and very negative. First of all, it's very negative to the Arab world itself. And to give again the example of the most important Arab state, I think the fundamental problems of Egypt not only will not be solved, not only will not be adequately addressed, I think they will become much more severe with the Muslim Brothers and the army. I speak mainly about the economic problems. I speak about the opportunities that young educated people have. I think they're going to have less opportunities. I think that Egypt is going to go from bad to worse. I don't see anywhere a positive development for the Arabs themselves, and certainly not for Israel. Let me give you only one example. We haven't had, thank God, the Arab Spring in Jordan. If we get the Arab Spring in Jordan, Jordan will crumble, go to the radicals, Muslim Brothers, radical Palestinians. So it can bring only negative elements to anything that speaks about stability in the region or the ability of countries in the region to deal with their problems. It is certainly, definitely very bad for Israel. There isn't the slightest positive sign there.
And about Iran and Iraq. Now, Iran and Iraq has some relationship with Israel, in history, and that we all know. But today, do you think that Iran itself is still playing a game with Israel, the United Nations, and the U.S.? And is Israel has plans to take any indicative action towards Iran's nuclear ambitions? And if yes, does Israel has evidence to prove it that Iran does have a very clear indication that they do possess enough nuclear material to strike?
Well, first, Israel did not have any good relations with Iraq at any period, but we had very, very good relations with Iran until the Khomeini revolution. Concerning the nuclear project in Iran, there is no argument among anybody who knows something about Iran, about the Iranian military nuclear project. I think it is a consensus today with all the experts around the world that we have enough evidence that the Iranians are building nuclear weapons. Do they have a bomb now? No. Do they have the capability to build more than one bomb, but a number of bombs? Yes. Can they do it immediately, within a few months? No. Within a year and a half? Probably yes. And I don't think there is a serious debate about it anywhere. The Iranians have been cheating on practically everything. Most of their lies have been exposed by the international agency in Vienna, but I think anybody who raises a question about this today is simply out of touch with the facts that have already been exposed. Concerning an Israeli action against Iran, this is a possibility, because if Iran becomes nuclear, not only the Middle East will change in a very negative way, the whole world will change in a very negative way, because immediately after Iran, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey will become nuclear. Down the road, more countries in the Arab world. Very soon you find yourself with 7, 8, 9 nuclear powers in the Middle East, so that you have the most dangerous place on earth with the most irresponsible leaderships armed with nuclear weapons. This will have an effect all around the world, because nobody can afford to disregard the fact that there are so many nuclear powers in the most sensitive region in the world. Trust in the United States will be undermined, because if the Americans can't prevent the Iranian bomb, you can't trust the United States in many other places, in Japan, in South America. You will find yourself with a nuclear bomb possessed by many countries in the world, and then it's only a question of time until a miscalculation can present an accident with far-reaching consequences. So this is something that the United States should have stopped, but if the Americans don't do it, then maybe Israel will have no choice but to do it.
And there will be an imminent war then.
Yes, it will produce reprisal against Israel, and the Israelis are prepared for it. They know that it will happen, and the real choice is between a small war when Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, or a big war when Iran does have a nuclear weapon. And the idea is that you can just refrain from war by doing nothing and letting the Iranians have a nuclear bomb is as silly as these ideas have been throughout history.
And also, let's come back to the security and the peace process. Security in Israel, for food, water, energy, itself, as well as security, cities that are preparing themselves from any kind of conflict. What can Singapore learn from Israel? Because Israel is able to self-sustain, when it comes to food, when it comes to water, and maybe even like you said in your earlier lecture, war in the cities. Are there any key points that cities like Singapore and other cities could learn from?
I don't know enough about Singapore to give a good answer to this question. It seems to me that the Singaporeans have a very healthy attitude of thinking long term, of assuming that friendly neighbors of today can become unfriendly tomorrow. I was very impressed by the water project that is actually something that should help self-sustainability with water as far as Singapore is concerned. So I think that the Singaporeans have already been thinking in long-term preparations for times of emergency. Our situation is different from Singapore, and the Singaporeans should be happy that it's different, because we are surrounded by enemies who wish to destroy us and are only deterred by our force. It is not true about most neighbors of Singapore, and I think that the situation in Singapore is different because it can build to a large extent on the goodwill of some of its neighbors. So again, had I known more about Singapore, I can give you a better answer to this. But it seems to me that in terms of awareness, this is very often the most important part. The Singaporeans know what they're doing and they think in long-term planning terms.
But to come back to that question, how does Israel able to be self-sustainable in terms of food, water, energy?
We are not self-sustainable, for instance, in energy because we don't have at the moment energy sources of our own. We have discovered very large quantities of gas in the sea, but remember that we haven't yet started using this gas. There is a small quantities that we're using, but the big quantities we haven't started yet. And second, in time of war, these installations are vulnerable. So what we've done is we've managed to bring oil to Israel, even in times of war, and we took into account the dangers of bringing it, and we managed to protect it. I don't want to be specific about it, but again, I don't think that you have a similar situation in Singapore. For instance, you don't have to bring oil from places where all the route is potentially hostile on the way to Singapore for many hundreds of kilometers. This is a situation that Israel is facing, and you are not in such a bad situation. Israel is not self-sustainable with everything, but it can bring to Israel whatever Israel needs, even in time of war, because we are strong enough to either deter our enemies from action or to respond to any hostile act against bringing it to Israel. And we also store enough so that we don't depend from day to day on what is coming in.
Including inflation. So
inflation in Israel is very low now. Very, very low.
But in times of war, what happens?
In times of war, there is no more inflation. Usually the wars are short and the impact on the economy is not immediate. And we have a very strong economy, so even if we have a war like we had in 2006 or in 2008-9 in the Gaza Strip, the impact on the economy is limited, very limited.
But the government does have a contingency plan where the prices will be controlled, I suppose.
You don't need to control the prices, because the market does it, and in time of war, the prices don't go up. Again, the wars are short relatively, and I don't think that we've had a problem with prices rising in time of war.
Now, about the Palestinian issue, will the Palestinians ever accept and willing to accept the conditions that Israel has proposed for peace process? Will there be peace between the Palestinians and
I don't
Israel?
see peace between the Palestinians and Israel in the near future for three reasons. The first is that the Palestinians are not willing to give up what they call the right of return, namely their right to destroy Israel after the establishment of a Palestinian state, so that you have two states, and one will be a Palestinian state, and the other Jewish state is a country that they will try to destroy demographically by bringing Arabs into Israel. So I don't see them changing in this regard. And at the moment, there are two other reasons, because on the one hand, you can't make peace without Gaza, because Gaza is about half the Palestinian population who lives now and will be citizens automatically of the Palestinian state. And you can't make peace with Gaza because in Gaza you have a government reflecting the will of the people that is not only against the existence of Israel, it is even against the existence of Jews. So I don't see the possibility today to reach a peace with the Palestinians.
And about the Israel attitude today, the new generation of Israelis, and is there a diverse change, of the changing society in Israel are Israelis becoming more aware of personal rights or human rights, as I call it, you know, and uh, and would this more awareness, and because of education and the media and the internet itself, uh, would that change the identity of being Israeli in the Jewish state compared to 10 to 20 years ago?
First of all, Israelis are consistently, since the establishment of the State of Israel, becoming more and more individualistic. And this is a very positive element, because if you look at one of the most important components in Israel, creativity, you cannot become creative when you are part of a coercing collective. The individualism and individual thinking is very closely associated with creativity. So not only is there no problem with individualism, it is a blessing, and the Israeli society is constantly changing in this direction. But this does not mean that you have less willingness to contribute to the collective. You have in the margins people who have taken this to the radical extreme, and they preach anarchy or nihilism in the name of individualism. But this is a very small minority in Israel. Its effect on the society is small. Its effect on the media is huge. Its effect on the perception of Israel in Europe and in other parts is huge, because they're being misjudged by many in Europe and by many journalists. But when it comes to the Israeli society, the constant development of individualism is actually very positive, and it leads to a more cohesive society rather than less cohesive society. Because cohesion does not mean that everybody agrees with everything, but cohesion means that there is a system where people can try to persuade others that their attitude is right, and while they're doing it, they're not breaking up the society, but bringing the society more together. Look, we've had a demonstration in Israel a year ago where almost 500,000 people went out of the streets protesting against the social and economic reality in Israel. I consider this to be a very positive mood, because what you've had last year was not an attempt to break down the Israeli system, but to modify it so that it will accommodate more the people who deserve to be accommodated, namely the middle class that pays taxes and serves in the army. And that's a very positive element. This year, you had radicals going out in the streets and breaking up banks, but in terms of numbers, it was less than 2% of what we've seen last year. So basically, what we've seen, massively supported by the Israeli people, is positive. Going out in the streets and demonstrating is a legitimate democratic process, and it produces democratic and important and, in my view, positive operative results.
Now, speaking about results, is Israel prepared for the upcoming unforeseen world currencies, to collapse? Should that happen, if the world currencies were to collapse, the world system, financial system collapse, will Israel able to sustain its shekel and its,
I don't know. I assume it will be extremely difficult, and it may not work, because if all the currencies collapse and the entire economic system collapses, Israel is very, very strongly tied to the most advanced markets in the world, and it will have a very, very negative effect on Israel. So far, we have dealt with the major crises in the world with relative success, and we have a better way of dealing with it than the Europeans and the Americans. But will Israel be negatively affected if really there is a collapse of the economic system in the world, I'm sure Israel will be very seriously negatively affected.
Even though you have gold reserves in Israel?
We have reserves, but that's not the point. The point is that Israel is oriented towards export, and when all its clients collapse, of course you cannot disregard it in Israel. It will have a very negative effect.
I see. But no, I don't think the world should worry for the time being. And about the challenges and response and to natural resources, do you think, and I know that I asked this before sometime a few days ago, uh, if Israel found now recently as they have found gas, and at the same time there's a company that's drilling for oil in Israel, which is Zion Oil and Gas Incorporated, and they have a cooperation with the Israeli government on this issue. If they have found gas, or they already did, but if they have found oil, I'm sorry, would that pose a threat or claim by the Arabs in the region?
Look, the Arabs will always complain. This is what Arabs do. They complain. So we need to disregard their complaints because they complain about everything. And this is their national product. I mean, we produce high-techs, the Arabs produce complaints. I don't think we will even take it seriously because they complain all the time about everything. I don't know how they will frame their complaint. I'm sure they will have overwhelming support in the United Nations because the United Nations would even support them saying that the world is flat or whatever, that we killed the Dead Sea. They will also always support it. But we can afford to disregard it. If we'll have oil, we'll use the oil.
And so Israel is not worried about their neighbors wanting to claim that
Look,
it's theirs?
we are worried about our neighbors because they're very hostile and very violent. But about their complaints, we don't worry because, it's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, and Arabs complain. It's part of the weather condition. It's something that you don't have to take too seriously.
For our readers who have sent me this question, and I like to pose this question to you, they ask, coping with the changes today, and what is your perspective, Israel's perspective on Jerusalem? What does it mean for the world, the Arabs and the Muslims? Because they say that Jerusalem is worth something and is worth dying for. Do you think Jerusalem is worth a lot to your neighbors around, and they want it back?
Look, first of all, I'd rather live for something than die for something, and I think this is the basic difference between the attitude of Israelis and the attitude of many Arabs. Not all the Arabs, but many Arabs. Second, Jerusalem became important to the Arabs only when it became important to Jews or Christians. I mean, I don't know how many people know that Jerusalem is not even mentioned in the Quran, not once. Okay? They speak about Muhammad tying his horse, his winged horse, to the mosque at the end of the extreme mosque, Al-Aqsa. And the question where this place is open to interpretations. And Jerusalem does not appear at all in the Quran. Now, did the Muslims start with having their Qibla, namely the place they turn to when they pray? The first was Jerusalem because they wanted to convince Jews to become Muslims. So they've chosen Jerusalem. When they saw that the Jews are not becoming Muslims, they turned it to Mecca and Medina. And then Jerusalem was relatively unimportant for most of the history of the Islamic world until it became important in the time of the Crusaders. Because it was important to the Christians, it became important to the Muslims. And it is interesting to note that for 19 years, East Jerusalem was in the hands of the Arabs, and it was not even made the capital city of the Arab state that had it under its sovereignty. I mean, Jordan. The capital city was Amman, and Jerusalem was never a capital city of any Arab state. Now, since the conflict with the Jews, Jerusalem became again important to the Arabs because it is important to the Jews and to the Christians. Now, if the Arabs would have wanted Jerusalem, they could have reached an agreement with Israel in the year 2000, when Ehud Barak in Camp David offered the Palestinians the partitioning of Jerusalem. It was offered again by Ehud Olmert in 2008. But the Palestinians did not want to settle it, and the Arabs did not pressure them to settle it, because Jerusalem is only important if you can do something against the Jews and not if you need to live in cooperation with them. I don't think that Jerusalem will produce a major all-Muslim attempt to die for Jerusalem. I don't think that this is the case. If one day we will reach an agreement about Jerusalem can be reached. And again, it was already offered by Israel in 2000 and in 2008. But what they want is more to hurt Israel than to help themselves, and this is true not only about Jerusalem.
But will Jerusalem be ever occupied fully, including the East Jerusalem, in the near future? Would that happen? Do you
I
foresee
don't.
that?
First of all, concerning ever, you need to speak to a prophet, not to a political scientist. Second, if I speak about my own personal politics, I advocate the partitioning of Jerusalem, and the part that is heavily populated by Arabs can go to the Arabs. Concerning the holy places, there will be a problem, but I think the problem can be solved if it is based on an attempt of people to cohabitate. If the emphasis continues to be on what hurts Israel rather than what helps the Arabs, it will make it more difficult. But let me tell you some other thing. If we were sitting here in 1967, and you would ask me, in the year 2012, do you think that Jerusalem would still be under Israeli rule, and that the issue is not yet settled, I'm not sure that I will tell you that this will be the case. So we didn't expect it to last so long until it comes to a settlement, but probably it does. I mean, it is already there for almost 45 years, so it can take longer.
Well, Dr. Dan, thank you for joining us here at the National Critics' Choice Saving Hyatts for the Hyatt hotels around the world. And thank you for joining us. I'm Robin Stienberg. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dan.
Thank you.
I hope that I did
And
not...
thank you again for this award here.